We'd like to talk a little bit about the subject of this ARC Fusion dinner. And each one of these dinners, each one of our events, each section of our big meeting next year are all about provocative questions. I mean, we want to, as we've been saying all night, we want to be edgy. We want to make you all think. And I hope that we're doing that or making you think a little bit differently tonight. We want to talk a little bit about tonight that's something that is fascinated me as a journalist and somebody that writes about all the amazing things that you all are doing and other researchers. And most of it right now, as Michael described, as our speakers described, are around therapies for people who are ill, have disabilities, and you know, it's obvious that we want to develop technology and science to help these people. But it's becoming very clear that some of these technologies are going to be able to push through a barrier to where healthy people, people who are not disabled or ill, possibly can take advantage of, if that's the right word, can use these technologies. And we talked about in the questions tonight, you know, some areas: stem cells, genetics, advanced prosthetics, and possibly downloading ourselves or, you know, completely giving up our corporal lives. You know, obviously, in this part of the world, we're very interested in that sort of thing, and other parts of the world as well. But I'm sort of interested in should we, not in the sense that we can stop it, because it's inevitable, some of these technologies, but just stopping to think about how far we should go with this. So, guys, should we build a better human and, you know, maybe take 2-3 minutes, just however you want to go with this?
Sure. So there's two theories of the case, right? Theory number one, you generate the universe 14 billion years ago. 2/3 of the way through, you generate Earth. Then you generate life almost immediately thereafter. Then about 99.96% of the story goes by and you generate the first hominids. So under that theory, the theory is that's all she wrote. Right? So the purpose of all these stars and sextillions of stuff out there is for your horoscopes and to be able to seduce your loved one. And by the way, that's gospel truth to most of the religions on the planet. So it's a view of the world that's very similar to everything revolves around us. Theory number two is there may be something else going on and we may not be the be-all and end-all of all evolution. We may not be the purpose of the universe. And in fact, there have been at least 30 different versions of hominids. We coexisted with various hominids at various stages on this planet. We interbred with several of the hominids on this planet. And virtually the only pure humans on this planet are of African descent. Because if you are European, likely you have Neanderthal gene in you, and likely if you lived in Southeast Asia, you have Denisova in you. And we are about to discover that you had several other versions of humans in it, and the normal state of life on this planet is you coexist with several versions of human beings. So there's two theories in this, right? The purpose of all creation has now flatlined. We've reached a point where we will not go beyond it, and it gets as good as Rush Limbaugh and Howard Stern, and that's it.
Seriously?
Well, that's what a lot of people think, right? And version number two is, what's really interesting about this dinner, and the reason why Steve Gullins and I, who are writing a book on future of evolution, are sitting here, is because there's a lot of people sitting at this table who should be sitting up here giving this talk. Not the least of whom are you two, but there's a whole bunch of you who should be up here because you know as much or more about this topic, or you're making it happen, because you've got the surgeon of the US ski team here, and you've got a guy who understands what technology wants, and you've got a guy who's sending 42% of the kids to the top colleges in the United States from the bottom 10th of the pyramid, and I could go on as you just go through the folks here. And I think it'd be really interesting as we sit at the bar, not in this format, to have a no bullshit debate about what do you want archaeologists to find in 100,000 years? Yeah. When they look back on what we designed into hominids, what do you want people to find?
Yeah, I think my view would maybe be a little simpler. I think we are all sort of executing a program in pretty exquisite detail, and we have a thirst and a hunger to evolve that, to create, to innovate. And my sort of sense is I want to see, where that all leads. And it's not going to stop here with what we are, but it's going to continue on in some sort of trajectory, and to have a hand in that and helping guide that and understand what is this program that's executing and where is it going to lead us and how do we become programmers in that space. So whether it's possible or not, I think certainly the types of technologies, whether it's genome editing, right, the amazing advances we're seeing now, being able to flip in and out alleles of a specific form to maybe treat some horrific disease or prevent a horrific disease. I think if you ask any parent what kind of child they want to have, they're not going to say they want one that's not beautiful or not intelligent or not physically adept. So I think we all will strive for that kind of thing, and we're going to see these technologies very soon, already happening in the IVF space, by the way. So we'll see those sorts of technologies advance. There's so much we don't understand about biology and the complex networks that are operating inside of us. It's very naive. We as humans like to tell stories. We're masters of the narrative, but we don't really understand statistical uncertainty. We don't really understand how all these complex variables are interacting. We've made discoveries, tens of years ago. ApoE is a great example in Alzheimer's, but still have no idea how that alteration is driving one to be predisposed to that disease. So we're only scratching the surface at our ability to master that kind of information flow and understand how to manipulate it to drive towards a certain end. So I think it's maybe not going to happen as quickly as we might all imagine.
This is the question that we ask you all, and these are the different answers. These are actually the percentages, and people answered very conservatively. And when I did my longevity book, same thing. 90% of people wanted to live somewhere between 80 and 120 years old and not any longer. And it's interesting that this group, of course, is a very forward-thinking group. And one might think that you all would be more inclined to go with some of the more radical options here. Is this a spread that you might expect, Juan, or is this, people being kind of forced into thinking about this?
I think there's something very strange and interesting going on here, which is the West Coast is so focused on the current bit app, immediate giant Twitter hit or Facebook hit or something else, that I don't think a lot of folks realize how drastically the center of gravity of life sciences and life code has evolved and is switching into the East Coast. And partly it's because you have an enormous center of gravity at Mount Sinai and just enormous amounts of, interest and angst and just desire and hunger to build the Broad Institute and the Icahn Institute and just put enormous resources into startups, into basic research, into hospitals. And those hospital clusters in New York and Boston are so powerful. Second thing that's important is the West Coast has depended for so long on public universities that when you get into a budget problem, you don't have the same sort of problems on the East Coast because a lot of these are private universities. And because there has been a very different tradition of longer term research. I think there's much more of a willingness and aggressiveness. And you see that when you walk around Cambridge, right? Because you've got the Merck Research buildings of the Harvard Medical School, and you've got the Novartis buildings, you've got Sanofi buildings, and you've got 269 life science startups in what has become the 13th largest economy on the planet in market cap creation, which is MIT. So there's a very different conversation going on the East Coast. And it's, I think, surprisingly, a far less conservative on these topics than what is going on the West Coast.
Would you get a different spread here if we had a meeting in New York or Mount Sinai?
Yeah, I found the spread interesting because the guys, my experience maybe with the West Coast guys has been a little different, although they're maybe in the tails of the distribution. You know, these guys want to live forever, and you know, whether it's Sergey Brin, Larry Ellison, Elon Musk, Peter Thiel, they're all here saying, you know, funding research. How do we crack this nut? When I was studying this little girl, Brooke Greenberg, who was not aging, so she was 20 years old. We were sequencing her, establishing stem cells, sequencing RNA. She looked exactly the same at 20 as she looked at 3. Her pediatrician could not distinguish between pictures taken from 3 to 20, could not order those chronologically. But the intense interest in that case, and it was coming, you know, wasn't really biased by coast, but definitely the super elite wealthy, the intense interest in that was like overwhelming. Like I had literally within 3 months of taking on that case, and it was on 48 Hours, what I forget the new show it was on, you know, had all of these guys sort of contacting and visiting and sending their representatives to visit, like, how are we going to live forever? Like maybe you only want to live to 80 to 100 because as your body is deteriorating, it's not as fun. But if you could suspend yourself at 25 or, you know, pick your age and have that sort of, you know, you know, go on for forever, you know, that's what these guys want. And so I think, so I'm actually kind of surprised by the spread. I'm surprised that more people aren't thinking that if, you know, you could pick that age, suspend yourself and sort of live like you lived at 25 or 30 or whatever you're going to pick, why you wouldn't do that.
I'd love to open this up now to you all.
I'm sort of interested in this question. You know, there's an element of self-engineering that you imply. The broader question is around, should we engineer each other to create a better society? And that's embedded in a lot of these assumptions. It's not just like a stronger, right? So that's where my questions are around. It actually wouldn't help the evolution of the species if you got bionic. Do you know what I'm saying?
Right.
It's like a much broader.
Well, I think Juan was partly making that point too. I mean, are we really prepared for that? I mean, if you really want to go all the way with this, you are going to have a few elite people, especially in the beginning, that get it, and you could very well create a subspecies or an entirely new species. Let me just ask Eric a little bit, even what you're talking about earlier. I mean, this does partly depend on, you know, let's say genetics, which you work in mostly. I mean, are we going to, you know, be able to turn this corner? I mean, we can still barely really use, you know, manipulate genetics, for instance, in humans to deal with disease. I mean, are we just being crazy even thinking about this at the moment?
Yeah, I don't think it's crazy, but my fear would be that we don't really have a very good idea of what to optimize. So we pick a few dimensions that we think are super important, and my fear would be that we're going to take ourselves down that trajectory. We're going to narrow variation down to something that has no wobble and doesn't allow us to select as things are changing. And we're going to have missed the boat. Like, we'll extinct ourselves because we're going to sort of say things like beauty and intelligence. And who knows, is intelligence really the right thing to select for? You know, what has intelligence got us so far? So we build more machines to pollute the environment. We create higher population densities because we can grow food in per square acre at higher density. So it's not clear to me that that's the right thing to be optimizing. It's not, you know, so I think a lot of these things that we think we want to achieve, that we strive to achieve, it's not clear if we were able to take that all the way down that it would be a good thing.
In a way, our evolution is, and an evolution of any organism is dependent on a continued diversity and being able to, you know, work through various issues. If we're all exactly the same, you know, something affects us adversely, planetary, we're dead. You know, we can't adapt. We're trying to build something for you, and we want to make this work. So give us your ideas. Tell us even tonight about what worked, what didn't work. You know, how can we make this conversation real? Really want to thank you all for coming. And can we give you some applause here? Okay.